And we're getting some more breaking news now. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has cancelled Quad meeting after United States President Joe Biden pulled out. So, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has confirmed that next week's Quad leaders meeting in Sydney will not go ahead after US President Joe Biden cancelled his visit to Australia. Now, all four leaders are likely to instead meet on the sidelines of the G7 meeting in Japan this weekend. And Anthony Albanese says that it's still possible that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will visit Sydney next week and that the bilateral that was scheduled will take place. So, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has cancelled the Quad meeting after US President Joe Biden pulled out. And he has confirmed that next week's Quad leaders meeting in Sydney will not go ahead after US President Joe Biden cancelled his visit. Now let's listen in to what Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said.
Because it's about boosting productivity and it's about boosting work. He expressed very much his disappointment at being unable to come to Sydney for the Quad leaders meeting and address the Parliament. President Biden, though, indicated that he was very much looking forward to coming down at a future date when it can be.
CNN News 18's Abhishek Jha is joining us. Abhishek, why did US President Joe Biden cancel his visit to Australia, after which Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has also confirmed that the Quad meeting has been cancelled?
So this cancellation is coming at the last moment because only yesterday evening India has also announced Prime Minister's whole visit schedule, including from Hiroshima to Papua New Guinea to Australia, where Prime Minister was to take part in this Quad meeting where President Biden was expected to go. But somehow President Biden has been forced to turn his attention to the domestic politics as he works to hash out a deal with his opposition Republicans to prevent the U.S. from defaulting on its debt at the end of this month. So these negotiations are very important and of prime concern of Joe Biden and the U.S. government right now, and probably for those negotiations and dealing, he had to cancel it to Australia. And since the Quad Leaders Summit has been with the idea that all the leaders must be present physically to have discussion on the security and trade aspect of Indo-Pacific and the Quad overall concept, this meeting has been cancelled. And Anthony Albanese, Australian Prime Minister, has just announced that this meeting will not take place, and all the four leaders, Prime Minister Modi, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, US President Joe Biden, and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will try to squeeze in some time to meet on the sidelines of Hiroshima, G7 happening in Hiroshima, which is also happening from 19 to 21 this May, next week. So clearly, while it will be a disappointment for Australia, because Australia was looking forward to host US President and Indian Prime Minister as well, because after 2014, when last Barack Obama had visited Australia, it would have been almost in 10 years' time, it would have been the first visit of a U.S. president to Sydney or Australia. And also, meanwhile, we haven't heard anything from Minister of External Affairs whether the Prime Minister's scheduled visit to Australia stands or there has been some, change in that also, because as far as Australian Prime Minister, he has said that Prime Minister Modi is a welcome guest. We will have to wait for rescheduling or anything that may be announced in the wake of this cancellation of Quad Summit in Sydney.
But Abhishek, Mr. Anthony Albanese has said that it is still possible that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi can visit Sydney next week and they can have a bilateral that was bilateral instead.
Of course, India and Australia, they have increased their bilateral engagements in terms of be it defense deal, people-to-people connect, student exchange programs, or trade ties in the last few years. In fact, there has been this India-Australia FTA also. So in that context, this visit also had a bilateral angle other than the Quad summit level talks, which was scheduled to happen in Sydney. So probably Prime Minister Modi will go ahead with his other engagements in Sydney other than this this Quad summit, and that will be bilateral meeting with the Australian Prime Minister and also addressing a diaspora event in Sydney, which has been scheduled, and apparently there's a huge crowd that is going to gather in Sydney welcoming Prime Minister Modi, and Prime Minister Modi is going to address that crowd. So clearly we haven't heard any confirmation or denial from MEA because it has been just a couple of hours since this whole Quad meeting has been, the announcement of the cancellation of this Quad meeting has happened. But still, as the Australian Prime Minister has said, Prime Minister Modi is welcome guest, and he is looking forward to hosting him in Australia in the next week.
All right, Abhishek, please stay with us. We also have Patikrit Payne joining us. Mr. Payne, good morning. So the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has cancelled the Quad meeting after United States President Joe Biden pulled out to address the debt issues prevailing in United States. What's your take on this?
Well, I think this calling off of this meeting is basically not an individual decision of the Australian Prime Minister. Of course, there is no point in having a Quad meeting if the American president cannot come. And if we look at the major crisis that the United States is going through right now, it's around a $31 billion debt default crisis, which is humongous. And this can actually, have major, profound implications for the global economy. This actually, if we look at a little bit about, the genesis of it, part of it is primarily because of an enormous amount of printing of notes that happened in the United States during the COVID period, which is almost around $4 to $5 billion. As a result of this major, and then the war between Russia and Ukraine happened because of it, major crisis of inflation happened. This money supply became so profound. Eventually, they had to raise the interest rates, and the raising of interest rates eventually had impacts on banks. 3 middle-level banks actually collapsed. So apparently, if in the last 2-3 years, compared to many other countries, especially like India, which have emerged as far more resilient to the era of COVID, I think the United States right now is in a very, very dire state. The debt default crisis can have profound implications. While Quad is very important, there's no denial of that. But, your ability to have, defense capability for dealing with global challenges only comes from your strong economy. And if the economy itself is in a dire state, then invariably the focus goes somewhere else, which is in the economy. And I want to reiterate here one very important point. One of the major reasons for the crisis that the United States right now has is the printing of money and doling out of that money to everybody through cash support, currency support. That is something which many of the states, unfortunately, in India are trying to do, for the sake of winning elections. That is dangerous for any country. India got saved during the COVID period because we did not do anything like that. We did not print money and give cash support to people. Instead, the government of India gave vaccines, gave free additional rations, which is far more pragmatic. That is why India was saved. But I think the strength of the Quad as a whole comes from their economies. If the economy of the most powerful nation of Quad is in crisis, then invariably the meeting of Quad itself gets compromised or, gets diluted. And so I think in that way, yes, this meeting can be deferred for some time because the priority right now invariably is to make sure that whatever challenges the United States faces gets, addressed, because eventually everything said and done, dollar remains the reserve currency of the world. Any kind of major crisis in the American economy would have an impact on dollar and global trade.
Right.
And that would have an impact on every country, including that of India or Australia.
All right, Mr. Payne.